Claire, a very warm welcome to the MotorMouth Podcast. Great to have you here. Now, we like to always dive into what's shaped our guests before we get going. So take us back. I mean, your upbringing, I imagine, was slightly different to most, but what shaped you as an individual? What do you think turned you into the person that you are today?
Firstly, actually, thank you so much for having me on. It's lovely to be here. I haven't done many of these recently, so I'm probably a bit rusty. What shaped me? Wow. I think, like probably anybody, your childhood, what you experienced, and the people that you were surrounded by. And obviously, I was incredibly lucky in that I was, surrounded by two parents when I was growing up who were really impressive individuals, I suppose. My dad, being on your podcast, everyone will know who my dad was, Frank Williams. And he was just an extraordinary icon of Formula One during his very long tenure. I think he was a TP for 50 odd years, and he really did extraordinary things. But, my mum was always behind the scenes, probably his biggest cheerleader. She always said that she was Williams's number one fan, and she was really a remarkable individual in herself. If it wasn't for her, Dad probably wouldn't have survived his car accident. Williams probably wouldn't even really existed. She was one of the key figures in the early days who bankrolled the team, and she was formidable. Anyone that came across my mum would testify to that. And I suppose they really shaped me in how to behave in life, how to treat other people, and clearly, hopefully how to run a team in a small way when I took over from my dad.
So we were during a non-race weekend, was sort of Sunday afternoons having a roast at home. Would you have like amazing names coming through the door for a glass of wine and stuff? Like, was it just surrounded? I've got this vision of you sort of surrounded by superstars on a Sunday afternoon. Is that how it was, or was it a fairly normal sort of life?
No, I'm really sorry to disappoint, but my childhood in that sense was relatively normal. It wasn't as star-studded as you might imagine. But saying that, I had some extraordinary experiences. Firstly, I don't think we ever had roast on a Sunday, and there was definitely no alcohol in our house. My parents were both teetotal. Okay. I think it was my younger brother and I that ruined that in the later years. But no, I mean, there were some amazing visitors, I suppose, to our house. We had Nigel Mansell would come along in the days when, the late mid-80s and the early 90s, when Dad was courting him to drive for the team. I remember my mum having planted. I mean, my mum was great from a hospitality perspective. She was fairly impressive. A driver would be coming to visit, or whoever it was, and she went all out. It wasn't just putting a few flowers in a house. She redesigned the whole back garden for Nigel's arrival, put in some beautiful black tulips. But the man came in a helicopter, as you do, and blew every single head off those tulips. And my mum was heartbroken. But I mean, so he came, we would have some politicians that would come to the house. I mean, I didn't really know who they were, but to look back, I now do. And that was quite cool. And it was a privilege. But I think one of my favorite memories were when Mum had enough of looking after us, and Dad was home from a race weekend, and she used to shove us off to the factory with him on a Saturday or Sunday, because he never spent really a weekend at home. And those were my favourite times, when Dad used to take me to Williams, and I used to run around the factory floor, probably irritating the hell out of everybody there, stealing stationery from the stationery cupboards. And that was where, I loved being, I used to be in the canteen tidying up coffee cups and making tea for people, and I love that. That was the best part of my childhood, was when we got to go to Williams. And I used to do that all the time in my school holidays. When I was 3, I was sat on my dad's secretary's, lap, typing addresses and playing with a franking machine, stamping mail.
Got a franking machine. I haven't heard about one of them for a while.
I know. Fax machines, all that kind of good stuff. that's how I
Yeah.
learnt my great admin skills that I have today.
Yeah, it must have been fun for him as well, though, because I take my son. Well, I've got 3 kids, and the middle one, Hector, who's 6, is a huge McLaren fan. Apologies, Williams fans out there. But he's a massive Lando Norris fan, and he's got all the gear. And I took him to Silverstone last year, and it was so nice seeing him pottering. Luckily, we managed to get him into the paddock. It was a bit of a blag, but we got him in. So he's surrounded by these people he idolizes, and we took him into the McLaren garage, and he met Lando. I've got an amazing picture of them together. But I don't think he realizes the impact it has on me as a dad who works in the industry, seeing him, with his hero. It's a very special thing to experience with your kids. But you mentioned there politicians coming around and so on. You studied politics at university. So was that with a view potentially to get into that sort of thing? Because I'd imagine politics could be quite handy in the F1 paddock. Or was it just, a stage of your life that you felt you should complete and you always knew you were going to go down the motorsport route?
No, I never knew what I wanted to do. And, I went to an all-girls Catholic boarding school and back in the 80s. And it wasn't really a time when women had... they weren't given the pathway towards ambition, I suppose. I didn't have like kids have today in schools, and I go and talk to children a lot in schools these days because, they have careers officers that are there providing people like me to go and talk in schools to try and inspire this next generation of women going into industry. We didn't have that when I was young. When I was at school, I was given, I was very privileged in that I was given a great education. But I'm not sure that there was a reason why I was given a great education. It was just something that, we all went to school. It wasn't with a view to my parents wanting me or had grand plans, or I had grand plans to become a doctor or a lawyer. And I certainly wasn't one of those students, and like some of my friends, they had an absolute clear destination, and that was to become a lawyer or a doctor or whatever. I didn't. And I was very average when I was at school. I didn't really excel at anything. And when I was looking at university options, because that's what we all did, we went to university. It wasn't really a choice in my education journey. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't have a bias towards anything. And to be fair, if I'm honest, I didn't actually go into Newcastle University to study politics. I went in to study Portuguese and Spanish because I love Spanish. But turned out you had to be pretty fluent in both. And as I'd never had a Portuguese lesson, it was quite a difficult year for me. I actually got thrown out of Newcastle University at the end of my first year. And then I decided to try politics because a lot of my friends were doing the course. And it was like, well, I want to stay at uni. To be fair, I still have nightmares about failing my exams at university, and that was 30 years ago. But I did politics and I loved it, and I ended up getting a 2-1, but it certainly wasn't with a view to becoming a politician, although now I'd actually really quite like to be an MP, which I'm sure is probably not a popular thing to say. But as I look at my career now and where I'm going to go next, it's like, what would I like to do? And I'd actually quite like to go into politics.
Really? Is that like an actual potential route for you, do you think?
I don't know if it's a potential route. I did actually end up at Downing Street on International Women's Day, so back in early March. And I got to seeing inside the cabinet room, and I was in heaven. And I really wanted to hide in a loo and then and then not leave. And then hopefully I might have bumped into Rishi Sunak, who may have asked me if I'd like a job. And then I kind of figure, well, I don't know. It's quite a long pathway, isn't it, to becoming an MP? And I'm I'm not a young mum. I'm an old mum to a young child. And that's my focus right now. But I think that would be the only thing maybe that would interest me.
Interesting. Now, during your tenure running the team, inclusivity was an important factor for you. You put Jamie Chadwick and Susie Wolf into development roles. You increased the number of women inside the team by nearly 18%, set up a women's ambassador program in schools, and involved in various initiatives like the Women in Innovation Scheme, and a lot of work around STEM and F1 in schools, etc., etc. It's clearly something that was and remains important for you. Taking us back to the time that you started working at Williams, which was circa 2002, have you seen the sport change since then, or how have you seen it changed in terms of women's involvement?
Now, I can probably only talk about my time because I haven't been close enough to the sport in the 3.5 odd years since I've left as to really understand what work's going on now. But certainly when I was still in the team, it was a real passion point for me. But probably in the latter few years of my time running Williams, it became a really not central, but a big part of my one of my kind of sideline projects, obviously, in addition to, performance and all that kind of stuff. But it was really important to me. It was interesting because it didn't have its roots in a particularly, feminist perspective that I may or may not have. It actually became a really important part of what I wanted to do at Williams, because it just really irritated me that there weren't more women. And I was one of only so few. And it never bothered me in the beginning when I first took on the role. In fact, I just never really understood why it was a big deal that there was another woman, in addition to Manisha, taking charge of a team, probably because I'd always been surrounded by men. I probably thought of myself as a bit of a bloke, to be honest with you. And it never, my kind of gender identity never crossed my mind. But it just started annoying me when people would just concentrate on it all the time. And it's like, okay, well, if I am in this position, I'm going to use it to my advantage and start doing something. Because actually, after a few years and some of the experiences that I endured, and experiences that weren't sometimes pleasant, being a woman, and I was Frank Williams's daughter, and I was the boss, and I was still experiencing some stuff. I thought, well, what are other people experiencing, in other areas? And so I wanted to make sure that I created a better pathway, I suppose, better experiences for the women that we had at Williams. But equally, I wanted to show women outside the sport that it was a really welcoming environment, because as much as I had a few negative experiences, like I think you can have in any industry, I didn't want other people having those. And so I knew that I could use my position to do something about that. And so we went about doing the work that we did, and I loved it. But it wasn't because, I was a particular feminist. It was just because I thought it was the right thing to do. Going through certain experiences myself in my later years, having a child, running a Formula One team, getting married, being a wife, running a Formula One team. It was hard. It was hard for me. And I had a lot of support, and financially I had cushioning to have people to support me at home and around me in the office. So many women don't. And, at the time, I don't think our team was doing, and I'm not going to speak about other teams, but enough to support women that wanted to go and have children, wanted to get married, because it's all about Formula One, isn't it? But if we want to make sure that we protect our future as a sport, you can't ignore one half of the population that can bring performance to your team. And so that was another reason why it was important to me to do it, because I wanted to protect, the future, incoming budding engineers, incoming aerodynamicists, not just men coming in, women as well.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's an ongoing challenge, isn't it? And I was in Miami a couple of weeks ago for the Grand Prix, and I had various meetings with people up and down the paddock. And outside of Karen Fink, who's working with Susie Wolf for F1 Academy, I think every single senior person I met was a man. And while there are women working up and down the paddock, and there's people like Rebecca Banks, who I'm sure who does a lot of work with Williams, and others who are in various marketing roles and so on. There still isn't team principal level people in the sport who are women, so there's still work to do. Do you think that gets spoken about enough, that there's not women taking on these team principal roles? There's you, and then you sort of start to struggle to think of others, Manisha, etc. But there's still more work to do, isn't there?
There is, and it's not just, I don't think it's just within Formula One as well. I mean, how many women are running other teams in other championships? I mean, I think Susie was the last woman to run a Formula E team, and she left that championship a while ago, didn't she? There's clearly, I mean, we all know there's a huge amount of work going on to try and find a female Formula One driver. And that's brilliant. You've got, as you said, the F1 Academy, you have More Than Equal.
Got the More Than Equal guys, yeah.
But where is there work? And this is a question because I know what was going on during my time in the sport. Things may have changed, but where is the work going on to try and find, and you've got to proactively go about finding, the new team principal. It can't be gimmicky, obviously, but if I look at teams up and down the pit lane, are there, women at a senior enough level to step into somebody's shoes if they left as team principal, as a woman? And I'm not sure that is the case. And certainly at Williams, it was for us. You can call it positive discrimination if you like, but you have to support women coming up the ranks. You have to, when you're interviewing, you have to address the unconscious bias of, in Formula One teams always promoting or looking to recruit men, and so many more men apply for these jobs. But I think more always can be done. I don't think that that's reserved to Formula One, but you're right. There are a lot of men still in the sport, and those men we always see on a Sunday when the cameras are in the paddock. And I think it's really important for those cameras to actually start showcasing the great women that are working up and down the pit lane, because there are a lot more than there ever were when I was working in the sport. But I just think sometimes they're not shown enough, but certainly at a senior level, what's coming through the ranks.
Yeah, very much agree. Now, you oversaw Williams for many years. It's been in your family since 1977. When did you first realise that the time was right to move on and sell? And just take us through some of the emotions that you were going through at that time. It must have been quite a difficult period of your life, I guess.
Yeah, my gosh, if my dad heard you just say the team had been going since 1977, he'd kick your ass. It was going on since 1969. He was very, very territorial about that. Whenever we have to celebrate some kind of 10th anniversary or 50th anniversary or whatever, I mean, if we hadn't done our maths, he got so angry.
Oh, God.
But I suppose it's true, right? He was fighting in the sport since that time, and those were probably the hardest times of his tenure in Formula One, the late 60s through the early 70s before he met Patrick. And so any deletion of those, you'd be in big trouble. Anyway, I digress. I'm sorry. It wasn't easy, as you could probably expect. Anyone that probably maybe saw an interview with me during that Monza 2020 race weekend, which was my last with the team and the Williams family's last, before we handed over to Dorothy. Those days were really difficult. 6 months in the lead up to it, when we were looking for a buyer, were hard, made even harder probably by COVID as well. But I suppose I was caught up in the whirlwind of trying to find the best buyer that we could, and going through the mechanics of how selling a business works while trying to keep the team on the road during COVID, while also managing a racing team. It wasn't an easy time, and it took me a really long time to, I think, process the situation afterwards, after we left. And it was incredibly difficult to have to make that decision, but it wasn't a decision that we made voluntarily. I think we all know that Williams would still be in the Williams family if certain circumstances hadn't drove us to that point of financial, well, nearly reaching financial oblivion, so to speak. Now I can see the headlines now have used that word. But it wasn't, we just ran out of money. We ran out of road. Formula One was a very difficult environment back in 2019, 2020. That's why I lobbied so hard and we got the cost cap across the line so that Independence team wouldn't face what we faced back in 18, 19, 20. And it's not something that I've probably come to terms with 4 years later. I don't think I'll ever get over the fact that Williams isn't ours anymore. But on a positive, we sold it to a brilliant group of people. And I couldn't be happier with that. And we didn't have to make any redundancies before we sold. We did not go into administration. And, as much as people slagged me off something rotten for a long time, I will always remain proud that we didn't let the team go into administration, that we didn't make redundancies, and we sold to a really great group of people who have the financial clout to take the team forward and to make the investments that we were unable to do.
I think people forget, don't they? They got short memories, and people focused on those last few years, where the reality was that actually you enjoyed significant success with podiums and points prior to that. You mentioned the financial regulations and COVID, which are obviously both scenarios very much out of your control that contributed to the situation. Do you think, had times been different and COVID hadn't struck and CVC had brought in the cost cap earlier, do you think you'd still be there?
Yeah, yes. If we'd have had a cost cap scenario in Formula One, from 2015, yes, 100%. We were spending 120 million sterling a year. And what's the cost cap now? It's just above that, right? In dollars.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, certainly that's the right amount of money to spend in Formula One. Unfortunately, at the time that I took over the team, we had that budget, and the other bigger teams and other teams around us, I think the bigger teams were probably spending north of $200 million a year, but suddenly it spiraled, the expenditure, as we all know, and the bigger teams were just outspending each other to get the performance on the track, and we could not compete with that. And we didn't have a car manufacturer backing us. I spent more time than I bet can think about trying to get a car manufacturer to come in with us, and it just didn't materialize. And we just couldn't keep up with that level of spending and the complexity of the technical regulations as well, to try and keep up with those and to keep spending our way out of problems was really, really difficult. But equally, I have to balance that with, we made mistakes ourselves. It's not, I cannot sit here and just say, it was everybody else's fault, it wasn't ours. We made mistakes. We didn't design a race car that could, that improved year on year. We lagged, and that was our responsibility at the team. But yeah, I think that we probably would be around still if it weren't for a number of mitigating factors.
And obviously James Vale's running the team at the moment. I mean, in very good hands there, and there's some really good people at Williams now. I suppose, a slight silver lining is that you must be very pleased with the team that's in place there at the moment.
I am, yes. And, as I said, Dorilton, we were very lucky that Dorilton came along when they did, because, not many people were wanting to put their hands in their pockets and buy a Formula One team at the time. And we were really lucky that they came our way. Matthew Savage, James Matthews, their ownership of the team is that they're just enormously respectful of the legacy. They are enormously respectful of Dad. I was in Miami at the weekend, and they have a brilliant bit of garage wallboarding that says "History made, history in the making," and they absolutely have a clear plan to get to making more history for the team. Good history, strong, positive history, winning races and world championships. And I don't believe that they'll give up until they achieve that. And they're doing that because, when we were in negotiations selling the team to them, they want to bring Williams back to its former glory. And for me, as you can imagine, wanting to protect my dad's legacy, that's what it was all about for me when trying to find the new buyer. And, James, I think, is a brilliant team principal. There aren't many people that I would want to step into my dad's shoes. I've never felt comfortable. I left my dad's shoes there, and I kind of was to the side of them. They were too big for me. But James Bowers, he's got a brilliant background. And the great thing about James is that he's one of those unique individuals that marries, and the engineering brain that you so need now in Formula One, being a team principal, but also the emotional intelligence to run and to be a great leader of people. So I'm really happy with James. I think, and one of the first things I said to him is, I think my dad would be happy that you're running his racing team as well.
Oh, that's nice. And
Yeah.
They've got some good partners as well. We went to an event, a media event in Miami with Michelob, the beer. And
Yes.
They've done this incredible Lap of Legends AI film with Logan Sargent, where they put the likes of Mansell in Red 5 on track with Logan and a few other races. I think the film's out tomorrow. Well, the 14th. So as we record, it's out the 14th of May.
Yeah.
And it's spectacular. I was lucky enough to watch the first 3 or 4 laps, and watching people like Mansell on track with the modern day Williams F1 car was spectacular to see, and it's well worth keeping an eye out. So if anyone's listening and is interested in their in the history of Williams, that is well worth watching out on the 14th. Claire, we have 3 final questions which we ask everybody on the show, and they throw up a myriad of different answers. So I'll fire them at you and see what we get out of you. So number 1, and this doesn't have to be motorsport related, it could be anything at all in your life. What's got you excited at the moment?
Oh, I'm loving my running at the moment. I've always loved. Are these quick fire questions? Because I know I can go on a bit.
You can ramble as much as you want. It's fine.
You can edit me. I've always run. I think I got it from my dad. My dad was a massive runner, for anyone that doesn't know, but he was running before it was cool to, and used to do regular half marathons competitively. And he took me out for my first run with him when I was about 6 years old, I think. I think we got about, halfway down the lane we lived on, and he took me straight back because I was so slow. But I've always done it. I've always found it, when I was working in the sport, to be a huge respite. Just some, that mental clarity that it gives you, and just physically, it was a really important thing for me to do, just to be able to keep going, doing what I was doing. But so I'm loving I go trail running at the moment. We live in the South Downs, and
lovely.
they're just the most beautiful trail running. And what's got me excited is a new book that I've just read, called There Is No Wall, by this brilliant author called Ali Bailey, who has been through some extraordinary times in her life, but she has done the most extraordinary running feat. She was the first woman to cross the Mongolian lake in Iraqi for now the ultra marathon that goes. So she's an ultra marathon runner.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to see her when she does a talk soon. So that's got me really excited, because I love human endeavor. And, my dad was a great hero of mine, and what he was able to achieve. And I suppose because I was surrounded by him as a youngster, not many people inspired me, because no one could really beat Dad's achievements. But this woman is just, she extraordinary, runs from Land's End to John O'Groats by herself, and, crosses the Panama jungle, and etc.
Did you see the guy, I think he's called Hardest Geizer on Instagram, who ran across Africa? It's amazing.
Yes,
so I bumped into him randomly the other day, because I manage some content creators in Formula One, and we're expanding into other sports. And I'm trying to get hold of him again to say, let me manage you, because there's such a story to be told there. And what he did was absolutely astonishing.
Yes. I mean, just these people that I follow now. I'm on Instagram a bit, kind of getting into the social media world, maybe 2 decades too late, but hey. You can see some people that just do this stuff. I mean, I say I love my running. I can run about 3 miles, and that's me done, and I'd like to say, well, I'm nearly 50, so I've got an excuse, but I don't, because I know there are people way older than me running way longer distances. But I mean, there's just what humans are able to do.
Oh, it's nuts.
It is nuts. Yeah.
It's mental. I mean, I'm not a runner. I would love to be, but I don't know. My bones can't take it anymore from years of playing cricket and tennis and various other things. I'm ruined, but I walk a lot. I get my fitness. I've got a dog now, so I walk nearly 8 to 10 miles a day, I reckon, across 3 walks. So I'm probably the fittest I've ever been, but I can't do running. I don't actually enjoy it. I just, no, it's not for me.
No, not for you.
No, but I understand why others would. Okay, second one for you. What's one lesson that your job has taught you that you think everyone should learn at some point in their life?
I have 2. So one is be brave. I wasn't brave enough sometimes when I was running the team. I was always a bit too apologetic. Like, I'm really sorry I'm the boss's daughter and I've been put in charge. Or, I'm really sorry I'm a woman. Would you mind just doing this for me? I don't want to come across as too bossy. And I think that we can apologise. Certainly a lot of women, but I know a lot of men can too, apologise for being the boss and not step in enough. And, I think certainly in team principal meetings, and being the only woman was quite tough in roomfuls of 30-odd blokes, particularly team principal blokes. I was always a bit too, step back and I want to be seen and not heard type thing. And I wish I'd just been a bit braver. So I would always say to anybody, be brave. You're there for a reason. And my second lesson would be, or best thing that I ever learned in F1, was something Mike O'Driscoll, who was my brilliant CEO, told me literally within about, a month of running the team, when I was being too apologetic for being the boss. He was like, oh, for goodness sake, Claire, can you stop asking permission and just start asking for forgiveness if you need to? And it is the best lesson. Just dive in, go ahead, do what you need to do. And if you mess it up, you just say you're sorry and move on, learn from your mistakes. That was my kind of guiding principle, I think, while I was running the team.
Great advice, both of those. Final one for you. What's one thing that nobody really knows about you?
Oh, wow. That's really difficult. One thing that nobody really knows about me. Maybe three things.
Oh, wow.
I'm actually quite lazy.
Right.
I can run around and I say that I'm not actually lazy.
Well, you're a mum. It's hard to be lazy being a mum.
Yeah, but I think I'm quite lazy. To be honest, I'd rather, if I could spend my whole life sat on the sofa watching Netflix, eating popcorn, I would. But I have stuff to do, so I can't. So kind of, I'm a bit yin and yang.
Yeah.
I'm really boring. I have no hobbies apart from my trail running, and I have 3 dogs, so I take them with me and I look after them.
What dogs have you got, incidentally? It's a quick tangent.
Little Cavapoos. So I've got the full set. I've got the apricot, the white, and the black.
Lovely.
And three dogs. I mean, it's ridiculous. I go to church quite a lot. I don't know. Well, and I do the flowers in our church.
Okay.
So we're
learning a lot about Claire Williams.
We're
learning a lot about Claire Williams, you see. This is great.
Yeah. Yeah. I love gardening. I love nature. I love being out in the garden. I don't know if there's anything else that I'll probably think of something, but I think probably I'm just a bit boring. I'm not very exciting.
I don't think that's boring at all. I mean, we had a guy on last week, Richard Morris, who founded Racing Pride, and found out that his nobody knows apparently that he was a international fencing champion. So you learn all sorts of random things doing this podcast. So
you see, I am boring. There is nothing. I have been average at best since I was about 5 years old.
However, you have run a Formula One team, which I think is fairly unique and rather impressive. But Claire, it's been fascinating talking to you. Thank you for joining us on the show. It's I met you once before. You won't remember because it was a long time ago when I was working. I think I was relatively junior in a sports marketing agency, and I came to Williams and I met with you and a guy that I can't remember the name of. I feel like his name was Alex.
Yes, from my commercial team.
That's right, and I felt incredibly scared. I remember sitting there thinking, oh my God, it's Claire Williams. Like, what? I didn't know how to process that information. So I just sat there in complete silence. So you won't remember me.
Oh, that's so funny. I do remember your name actually, Tim. But that's one thing I find that so weird because a lot of people say that they're, intimidated to, I can be quite intimidating. I think I've got that resting, what face.
Right.
And I'm actually not that person at all. I'm quite shy. I'm quite antisocial. I don't have a lot of friends. I'm the least scary person you could possibly meet. I'm more scared of you than you are of me.
But you build up a perception, don't you? You sort of, I knew for a week or two that I was going into Williams, and it was one of the first F1 factories I ever went to because it was, I was quite early on in my career. And I just remember working up scenarios in my head, like, she's going to think I'm a plonker. Who's this young guy that's come in here and, thinks he knows what he's talking. I was just creating scenarios that didn't exist. Fortunately, you were lovely and it was fine. So
you see, typical imposter syndrome. That's terrible.
I'm terrible with that.
We all think that. I think everybody, anyone that says, well, I don't have imposter syndrome, I don't believe. Because I think, we're human. The human condition is to worry about what people think of us or worry whether we're good enough or not. And I actually think it's a really humble thing to have as a character trait. I think it shows that you care.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've always suffered from that. I mean, I've had terrible dyslexia all my life and terrible academic skills at school. I've literally got through by talking to people. That's it. I have nothing else. And I think that imposter syndrome creeps in regularly, especially for people with dyslexia who walk into a room full of very intelligent people in Formula One, and it can be quite intimidating. But equally, I was doing a podcast not long ago on someone else's show, and I had the reverse happen where they at the end admitted, like, we were really nervous about having you on the show. I was like, don't be ridiculous. Like, it's that's a stupid thing to say, but on the whole, I think people are genuinely pretty nice people, up and down the paddock, no matter how senior they get. On the whole, people are pretty nice. And like you say, you've just got to go for it, haven't you? Throw yourself in and see what happens.
And I completely agree. And I think that's a real misnomer about Formula One, that it can be quite, I mean, yeah, it's tough and it's fast paced and we see all these people on the telly, but all these people, they are so nice. Yeah. And they will look out for you and have your back. And everyone's just trying to do a good job and get on, right? Like everything in life, we're all just trying to get on and do the best job that we can. And, you know, I don't think anybody should be intimidated by anybody else. But saying that, you know, I'd walk into a strategy group meeting and be intimidated by every single person in the room. So
yeah. I mean, it's difficult, but life is. But no, it's been fascinating talking to you and getting these insights and hearing all about you. And nice to talk to you again after all these years, even though last time we met, I didn't say a word. But I've made up for it now. Look at me now. Look at me now, chatting away. But thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. Claire Williams, thanks for joining us on the MotorMouth Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I've loved it.